بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Rahman Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ala. So while we begin, if you want to retain the slide deck for what we're going to be discussing today, this is a QR code. I'll put it on again at the end of the session, but I cannot promise it'll be there for too long. So it's gone. So you're more than welcome to take a picture of that, and it should take you to the file. You can save it on your phone. So while you do that, I'll speak for a couple minutes. So inshallah, we're going to be speaking about the fiqh of fasting. The ahkam of fasting are very detailed. To be frank with you, having 30 minutes to cover this topic isn't really enough. But I think that this should be a good starting point for us. It should be a good review for us on how fasting works. And I think if there are any questions about what we go on or what we discussed today, or if you realize that there is a knowledge gap that you have based on what we discussed today, then this would be a good, motivation for you to go back and maybe ask those relevant questions or read up more on fasting and read up more on the masail and the issues. So I'm going to quickly move on. I do apologize. Again, I'll put that again at the end of the session. First and foremost, we're going to speak about some of the wisdoms of fasting. I just want to really briefly touch upon this because this is a wisdom that I found in a fiqh book, right? So I consider it part of my purview to mention it. So one of the wisdoms of fasting that was really alluded to by the previous speaker in really good, excellent detail, and which is mentioned in this specific line is, when the stomach is deprived, the spiritual body is nourished. That was a specific line that I really enjoyed. And subhanAllah, we don't think of the spiritual self as requiring nourishment, right? We don't think of it as requiring food. But in reality, it does. And when that spiritual self is hungry and when it is, malnutritioned, then we all know and experience the effects of it. And so for this reason, this big, great blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of fasting, which is not only a means for us to gain closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to get benefits with regards to our akhirah, but also it is a vessel, it is a means for us to live in a way which is natural and to live in a way which is beneficial for us even in this life. And this is just one of the many reasons we should be grateful for this beautiful religion and beautiful deen. Another element of fasting is the fact that this is, in terms of its fiqh, is the fact that this is a ibadah. And as we know, ibadat are such that they are specifically sanctioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore the scholars mention with regards to the ibadat, we cannot determine their rulings through intellect. So for instance, when I'm performing salah, we just performed Salatul Isha. Now, who's to say how many raka'at we should be performing Salatul Isha, right? Is it 2, is it 3, is it 5? Theoretically or rationally, it should be as many as you can pray, because the more you pray, the better it is. However, we know from Islam and from the hadith that we can only perform 4 raka'ats fard. And if we perform 5, then that salah is invalid. And a single raka'at salah is invalid, etc., etc. So this is a general concept with regards to ibadat, that they have very specific rulings. Right? What are those things that break the wudu? It's very specific. It's only mentioned in Quran and Hadith. That's the only way we could determine them. It's not something you would come up with rationally. Furthermore, now that we understand that the rules are delineated in Islam, we are bound to those rules more than in any other aspect of our life. Right? So for instance, within salah and within tahara and within fasting, we have to stick to those exact rules, and if we don't, then our fasting is considered null, it's considered invalid, or it's considered incomplete. And with regards to this, a verse of the Quran comes to mind where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the different ahkam of slaughtering an animal and the different ahkam of hajj. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not need, and the animal, the flesh of the animal, the blood of the animal doesn't reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, the thing that reaches Allah is your taqwa. The thing that reaches Allah is the sentiment by which you carry out that action. And I want us to understand fiqh from this lens as well. You see, the person who is close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the person who, has taqwa and the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his heart, he's going to be very careful with the physical aspects of his worship. He's going to be very careful that what is the best way for me to tie my hands in salah, or what is the best way for my fingers to be pointed, in ruku or in sujood, or what is the exact methodology by which I should perform the fast. So we understand that by sticking to these rules, by sticking to these specific guidelines which have been given to us, this is a completion of the fast, and this is actually an embodiment of our servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that these things are important. The rules are important. We don't go around bending the rules or saying Allah is forgiving, or saying that, it doesn't really matter. What big difference does it make? Right? Because ultimately that's why we are given these rules, to be tested how well we adhere to them and how much importance we give to them. So that being said, inshallah, we're going to go over a basic overview of fasting. As I said, 30 minutes is not really enough. But some of the basic topics we'll talk about is, first and foremost, who must perform the fast? And within those people who have to perform the fast, when do we have an exception that we do not have to necessarily perform the fast in the month of Ramadan? We can perform it later. We'll talk about the specific categories. Then we'll look at the fasting itself, and we'll look at what are the integrals of fasting and how it's performed, and what are the things that nullify the fast. First and foremost, who is fasting binding upon? First and foremost, the person has to be Muslim, right? So every Muslim, a disbeliever obviously, doesn't have to fast. The person has to be sane. Now sanity here is defined in the books of fiqh, the books of usul al-fiqh. It's a long discussion. It's not something I could very easily give you a definition or easily give you a explanation for. But essentially what this means, that there are certain psychological illnesses that when a person reaches that level, he is not mukallaf, or he's not required to adhere to the different, rules of Islam, right? And for a specific situation, you'd have to go to a scholar. I would say something that is somewhat relevant is, people when they reach old age, sometimes they have issues, they have cognitive issues, mental issues. This is the type of thing you'd have to talk to a Muslim doctor, you'd have to talk to, a Muslim scholar, and you'd have to find out if that person is required to fast or not, right? Because the issues of fidya also come into play. The person, if he has to be mature, so a boy or girl who reaches the age of maturity. The latest age for a boy is 15. In the lunar calendar, the latest age for a girl is 12. In the lunar calendar, once they've reached that age, then for sure, it is necessary for that person to fast. And if they attain the external and the specific alamat, or the signs or the reasons for becoming bulugh before then similarly, fasting in Ramadan is binding upon them. This is something which sometimes we find community members lacking in, that they think that a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old is too young to fast. SubhanAllah, we're just so privileged and we're just so used to eating all the time. That's why we think that it's not normal to stay 12 or 13 hours away from food, whereas this is not something which is too difficult. As a matter of fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it fard upon us, and the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it fard is a sign that a person is ready, because la yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only makes those things fard upon us which we are capable of fulfilling. And then for women, of course, they have to be pure. This is not a requirement for men. So for instance, a man who's in the state of janaba, that man can enter into the fast in the state of janaba. That doesn't affect the fast at all. It is not like prayer where you have to be in a state of purity necessarily to begin the fast. But for women specifically who are not in a state of purity, they are not allowed to perform the fast or perform it after Ramadan, meaning after they become pure, that's when it will become obligatory. These are 5 categories of people who are excused from fasting. First and foremost is a person who is sick. So a person who is sick we're going to talk about the definition of it in a minute, right? In terms of when does a person become excused from fasting. A woman who is either pregnant or nursing, we're going to talk about that as well. And then a person who is traveling, and the elderly. I don't know why this is not going away. Bismillah. Okay. So, and the last one is the elderly, and we'll talk about all these in specific detail here. So first and foremost, for sickness, if a person fears 2 basic things, either if you're already sick, right? Either you fear that your sickness will increase, or if you're not sick, if you feel that you will become sick. Let's say a person has a specific condition. If they were to stay away from food, you can ask a doctor, right? If they were to stay away from food, then it would potentially cause them actual, bodily harm or bodily injury. Or if a person is sick and fears either that sickness will be prolonged, meaning the recovery from that sickness will be prolonged, or it will be aggravated and the sickness will increase. All of those situations, our deen has been made easy for us. We are allowed to delay the fast and perform the fast afterwards. And the scholars mention, how do you determine if that sickness is okay for you or enough of an excuse for you to delay the fast? So either you will determine this from personal experience. You know your body, and you know that if I'm in a specific health condition, if I were to, not to fast, then this would be the effect of that. And secondly, if a, qualified expert Muslim physician tells you, right? So you have to go to a Muslim, qualified, an expert, a muttaqi physician, and he will tell you based on your condition that you should not fast in this given situation. And if so, then of course you are allowed to delay the fast until you become in a state of health. Similarly, for women, if they're pregnant or nursing, if they fear any harm to the child, right, whether it is physical, whether it is mental, right, any type of harm to the child, that child doesn't have to be their own. As long as a child, let's say a woman is, nursing a child, and that child is a different child, but she is responsible for caretaking the that child and feeding the child, then for her it is completely permissible as well to delay the fast and to perform the fast at a later time. A person who is traveling. So when we are in a state of travel, you see, in our travel, generally we don't undergo the same difficulties that people used to undergo in the past, right? So if we're traveling and we're just driving, or we're taking a short flight and it's not, messing with the iftar time, then the question comes about, should a person fast or is it better not to fast? This is a discussion that the fuqaha have had in detail. The Hanafi madhab specifically says that if a person is confident in their ability to fast and their ability to complete the fast, then it is better to fast. However, even if the travel does not have any element of difficulty, that doesn't mean that the fast now becomes binding upon you. It is dispensation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you are more than allowed to delay beginning that fast until you are in a state of residence. This slide I'm going to skip, but since you have it now, you can read it if you want to see some more detail. Now, the last category was the elderly, and I want to add on to that category this slide here. So we all know about fidya. Many of us have heard about fidya. Now, fidya is a payment that is given on behalf of the fasts of a person who cannot fast, right, and will not ever be able to fast, right? So a person who is elderly, in such a condition that they are unable to fast, or a person is sick and it is in a chronic sickness, a sickness where you do not expect that person to recover, this individual can start paying fidya for their fasts. Or a person can start, if that is an elderly parent of yours, you can start paying on behalf of, your parent. Or if the person passes away. So if a person passes away and they had fasts that are due upon them, of course at that situation, they can never make up those fasts. So in that situation, fidya is permissible. Fidya is not permissible for a person who, is in a state of temporary sickness, right? And that's why the scholars mention that if a person is in a state of sickness and you pay the fidya on behalf of that person thinking that they will not recover, afterwards they do recover from the sickness, they now have to fast. And that fidya becomes null and void. Right, because the fidya is specifically for those situations wherein a person does not expect to have the ability to fast. So the person who is elderly, right? A person who's elderly, they may break their fast, meaning they don't have to fast. They are in a physical condition where they are unable to carry out the fast, and they will pay the fidya. They will pay the fidya understanding that they probably will never return to a condition where they're able to fast. Correct? But again, if that person gains the ability later on, then the making up of the fast will become necessary. Okay, so now let's talk about fasting specifically, right? And some of the rulings of fasting. And before we talk about the rulings, I like to look at things from more like a definition perspective. So let's look at what fasting is. So fasting is defined in the books of fiqh as a person who's eligible. So eligible is a person who, is in accordance with those 4 requirements. He's a Muslim, he's sane, right? He's mature, right? So if a child is fasting, that's technically not considered fasting, right? Or if a person is not Muslim, of course, that doesn't count as a fast, etc., etc. So a person who is eligible, you refrain from fulfilling the needs of the stomach and private part between true dawn to sunset coupled with intention. So true dawn means the beginning of Fajr all the way until sunset, meaning Maghrib time. All you have to do is refrain from eating, drinking, right? From that beginning time to the end time, and that qualifies as a person having fasted. So when we understand this definition, we also understand that, you can ask a question, if somebody backbited, does that mean that they have fasted? Well, technically from the fiqh perspective, yes, because they qualified under the definition of fasting. And we'll talk about why this is important in a minute. So the integrals are abstention from fulfilling these desires, right, of the stomach and private part for that specific period of time, and the specific time is also mentioned. So within this definition, I want to point out two things. First and foremost, you have to refrain from fulfilling the needs of the stomach and private part. That's number one. And number two, it has to be coupled with intention. So the rest of my lecture is going to revolve around these two topics. So we'll first look at intention, and then we'll look at what breaks the fast and what doesn't break the fast in the next part. So first and foremost, let's talk about intention. So what is a valid intention for Ramadan? Right? Sometimes people have the thought that, for your Ramadan fast to be valid, you have to say specific words, right? Nawaitu an asuma, something like that. Or, it has to be done the night before, right? So these things have been discussed and have been mentioned in fiqh. First and foremost, the intention is the action of the heart, right? So that's why the scholars mention a person who wakes up for suhoor, that in itself is the biggest intention, right? Because you don't usually, most of us don't usually wake up at 4 in the morning and start eating and then, of course, the reason we're doing that is to fast. What is an example of somebody not having an intention is you literally aren't intending to fast in the month of Ramadan. You're planning not to fast. And you just happen to not eat anything the whole day. You guys understand? So somebody didn't think he was fasting, didn't want to fast, and he happened to not eat food the whole day. So the question is that person's fast complete? And the answer is no. Because every act of worship requires an intention. In salah, you have to have an intention before you perform salah. You can't just move up and down and say my salah is valid. You have to actually intend to perform salah. Similarly, a person could go and drive through, Mina on the day of Arafat, and you might ask, is that person's hajj complete? Well, if he was planning to just drive through, then no, it's not, because he did not have the intention of hajj. So similarly here. The only dispensation for fasting is that intention doesn't have to be made from the beginning of the action, right? So for instance, with regards to salah, we cannot make an intention halfway through the salah we're praying. We have to make the intention at the beginning. For fasting, we've been given the dispensation that you can make the intention before half of the fast is complete. Right? So before half of the fast is complete, as long as the majority of your fast contains the intention, your fast is valid. That means if I miss suhoor and I wake up, I still have the opportunity to make the intention. How much time do you actually have? So it's at the middle of the fast. And I made this little diagram here. I don't know if you can see it, but the point is, you see, dhuhr is the midday. Dhuhr is the time between sunrise and maghrib. So if you calculate the time between the two, that's about when dhuhr is. However, the fast is not from sunrise to maghrib. The fast starts before sunrise, right? So essentially, the fast includes all of fajr time. So if you calculate from fajr time until maghrib, the midpoint there will be before the midday, right? So you don't have until dhuhr to make the intention. You have a little bit before dhuhr. If you want to calculate this, an easy way to do this, the scholars mention, calculate the time between fajr, beginning of fajr and the end of fajr. Let's say it's an hour and a half. So an hour and a half, divide that in half. That's 45 minutes. And then subtract 45 minutes from dhuhr time, right? So that would mean 45 minutes before dhuhr time. That is the point until which I have the opportunity to intend to fast. This is useful to know because this also applies to nafil fasts, right? Person woke up in the morning and he thinks, maybe I should fast today. So you have not until dhuhr to make that intention, but until, just before dhuhr. Usually about, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, something along those lines. Same for the fast of Ramadan. Okay, so now we talked about intention. So now we told you there was the other aspect of the fast, which is you have to abstain from fulfilling the desires of the stomach and private parts. So I'm going to divide the whole rest of the discussion into these two. First, let's talk about the stomach, meaning eating and drinking. Now, within these two categories, there are three general categories of actions. One, those things which don't break the fast, right? And so I'm specifically talking about eating and drinking, which doesn't break the fast, right? Otherwise, technically anything besides that, talking, laughing, something like that. It doesn't, walking, all those things, sleeping, they don't break the fast in general. But what are those actions within eating and drinking that don't break the fast? That do break the fast but require kaffara, or that do break the fast and don't require kaffara. Similarly, with the second category, we're going to talk about that which doesn't break the fast, that which does break the fast, but doesn't require kafara, that which does break the fast and does require kafara. So we're going to talk about these three categories for both of those two general categories. First of all, eating and drinking. Okay. So here's an interesting thing about fasting. As I said, this is something which is mansus alayh. This is something which we can only determine through Quran and Hadith. And we understand from the corpus of Quran and Hadith that we are prevented from allowing food to enter our jawf. Or, jawf can be roughly described as stomach, but includes more than just the stomach, right? Exactly what parts of the internal body it includes, it might be a little complicated for this discussion here, but in essence, it is, I translate it as a body cavity, right? So the main exception to this is if a person inserts something into their bloodstream, because that doesn't go directly into that jawf area, right? Because it doesn't go directly to the stomach, it is not something which nullifies the fast. If it was, then, in many instances where a person is bleeding, we would be told to immediately cover the wound so that nothing goes and touches the wound and potentially breaks the fast. We would be told that not to put certain lotions that the body will absorb, because the body will absorb, it'll go into the bloodstream, it'll go into the rest of the body. But that's not mentioned anywhere, in the Quran and Hadith. What we are prevented from doing is eating or drinking or letting anything enter into this digestive system in general, right? Or into this, it's more than actually just a digestive system too. So in any case, this is why the common objection, right? Why don't IVs break the fast? This is the reason. IVs, they go into the bloodstream. They do not go directly, right? Obviously, they eventually get to the stomach and the rest of the body, but they don't go directly into that jawf area, and therefore it does not break the fast, right? Similarly, taking, taking an injection, a vaccine, right? Taking a vaccine. So that vaccine also, because it's not going directly into the stomach, right? That is something also which doesn't break the fast. So the scholars mentioned there are certain pathways to the stomach or brain, and we're going to, not the brain. Sorry, I should remove that. Because I had a long discussion with, last time I did this, there was a doctor in the crowd and long discussion. So I'm like, okay, I need to take brain out. So, certain pathways to the stomach. This is a mistake. Certain pathways to the stomach. So, first and foremost, the mouth, right? So, anything you put into the mouth. Now, if it's in the mouth but it doesn't go down the throat, that technically doesn't break the fast. And we'll talk about specific examples there as well. So this is the pathway, but it has to go all the way down into the throat. Same with the nose, right? If it goes down into the nose and past, that would break the fast. If it goes, like if you have a nosebleed, you put a paper towel on your nose and you take it out, of course that doesn't break the fast. But if something goes through the nose all the way down, right, into either the throat area or a little bit further than the throat, essentially that's where the fast will break. Similarly, this is mainly for medication. So there's three things here for medications, right? Anemia, which is taking medication from from the backside, right? That's done in medicine, right? Especially back in the day. So any medication that is ingested like that, of course, that would also break the fast. Similarly, through the ear and the eyes. Now there's a little bit of discussion with the ear and the eyes. The scholars of the past had mentioned, by and large, that medications that are inserted into the ear, they break the fast. And they say that if there's just water which enters the ear, it doesn't break the fast, right? So generally, if a person, let's say, is swimming, right? If a person is submerged in water, there's water that goes into the ear. Water doesn't break the fast, but they said medications do, because the purpose of medications was to actually go further into the body. And modern science tells us that it depends, right? So not necessarily eardrops are meant to go all the way into the body. As a matter of fact, most people, it wouldn't go past the ear. Right, and they say that if a person's eardrum is perforated, right, and then potentially something could go through. So in any case, most modern scholars say that medicine in the ear does not break the fast, right? Or I don't say many modern scholars say the ear actually would be exempt from this rule and it would not break the fast. So this is just something to consider. If we have a specific situation, again, ask the specifics from a scholar just to get clarification. With regards to the eyes, we know that the eyes, when a person cries, right, your nose gets filled up with tears, because anything that goes in the eye immediately goes, into the nasal cavity and it immediately goes down. So eye drops, right? Purpose of eye drops, they're basically going to go, down into the nasal cavity and your fast will break. So that's why scholars mention that eye drops would break the fast. However, there is a hadith specifically where the Prophet ﷺ used eyeliner. And so the scholars mention that eyeliner and kuhl will not break the fast, potentially also because it's being applied to the exterior of the body rather than eye drops which are being inserted into, the eyes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So once you understand that general that general framework or overview, let's talk about specifics. First and foremost, I mentioned there's 3 categories. That which doesn't break the fast, that which breaks the fast requires kafara, and that which breaks the fast and doesn't require kafara. First and foremost, what doesn't break the fast? So first and foremost, anything which doesn't enter, I'm going to take brain out, anything which doesn't enter the stomach, right, from these pathways. So as I said, applying lotion, applying, even as I said, eyeliner, right, that wouldn't break the fast because that is on the exterior. Similarly, the scholars mentioned lipstick or Vaseline, right, that is on the exterior of the mouth. You're applying it to the exterior. The purpose of it is not to ingest it wholeheartedly into the stomach, and therefore these would be considered permissible. Applying lotion, all those things would be permissible. Secondly, forgetful consumption. I'll talk about this inshallah. This is a specific exemption that has been given, again, to make things easy for us as human beings, because it is the nature of human beings to forget, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for us by exempting us from any forgetful consumption. And third is unavoidable consumption. Unavoidable consumption means that thing which you consume unintentionally and unavoidably. So for instance, a person who smokes, scholars mention smoking does break the fast, right? Smoking is action which does break the fast. However, secondhand smoke doesn't. And the reason for that is because it's something which is unavoidable, right? Another example, if you have dust, there's like a dust cloud, and that enters into your mouth, you can feel it goes down your throat. That's unavoidable, right? You have, a fly and it just, perfect moment, comes into your mouth, it goes down your throat. That's something that you couldn't avoid. And all of those situations, you are exempt and your fast doesn't break. So here's some examples here. As I said, applying oil to the body, applying eyeliner, kuhul, right? Because this is mentioned specifically in hadith. Water entering the ears, but you shouldn't apply too much. Right, you shouldn't apply too much kuhul. And some people, a person told me, he said, when I apply kuhul, I can taste it. I'm like, well, maybe that's a problem. So don't put that much kuhul, right? Be a little bit careful that you aren't okay. So the next is water entering the ears. Again, as I said, yes. That's a good question. I'm going to table that and say I can't give you a full answer there. But that's something to think about, inshallah. I'll give you an answer privately, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Yeah, so that's a very good question though, mashallah. Okay, so water entering the ears, just naturally, as I said, even, this is not, because this is different from medication, right? Medication would be different. And as I said, most scholars say even medications don't break the fast. Cupping. This is something, it's mentioned hadith. The Prophet ﷺ says, the person who is cupping, he has broken the fast. And, this is something which none of the 4 madhahib interpret literally. Nobody says actual cupping breaks the fast, because there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he had cupping done while he was in a state of fasting. So why is this mentioned, or why is that first hadith mentioned? There's different reasons for it, there's different interpretations. The main 2 interpretations are that, first of all, for the person who is getting the cupping procedure done, when the Prophet ﷺ says he has broken the fast, it means he is close to breaking the fast, because many people are weak, and when they get blood removed from the body, they become further weakened, and it's not something which is good for that type of person, because that person will end up breaking the fast out of weakness. He'll start to drink water or drink juice or something like that. And then the person who is doing the cupping, and this is going to gross you out a little bit, but back in the day, didn't have necessarily, suctions and things like that. They would often start the suction of the blood with their mouth. Right? There's a method to start. You don't drink the blood. You start the suction and you put it, below gravity. Once you start the suction, then gravity will start to pull out the blood. So sometimes, obviously, you can end up with something going down your mouth. So the Prophet ﷺ is prohibiting that specifically. Backbiting, even though you're eating the flesh of your brother, it's not literally eating his flesh, and therefore your fast is fine. Intending to break the fast but not doing so. This is interesting, because if you intend to fast, your fast gets started. But if you intend to break the fast, your fast doesn't get broken until you actually consume something or actually break the fast. And then the rest of it, most of it we've already talked about. Tasting or chewing something as long as it does not enter the throat. Right? So they mentioned this, that even like tasting food and spitting it out, it is fine, but it's considered makruh if it's done without any valid reason, right? If there's no specific reason to be doing so, you should not be putting things in your mouth and taking it out. But as long as you spit that thing out, whatever the thing is, you're putting it in your mouth, you spit it out, then that will not break the fast. Okay, so the slide of intentional versus forgetful, it's going to show up somewhere where I totally didn't intend it to. So let me just talk about that very quickly. So forgetful consumption does forgetful consumption does not break the fast. There are 3 terms here. One is intentional. I do something intentionally, meaning, there's water here and I'm thirsty, I open it up and I drink the water. That's intentional. Accidental is, I know I'm fasting, I'm maybe making wudu, I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm fasting, I'm not trying to drink the water and some goes down my throat. This is considered accidental. This does break the fast, it doesn't require kafara, it's coming up. And the third is forgetful. I have no idea that I'm fasting. There's a bottle of water here. It's my normal habit. I pick up the water, I drink it. This is forgetful, meaning you had no perception of the fact that you're fasting. This is the specific category which you are exempt from, and your fast does not break if this occurs. So the slide's going to show up. We'll see, inshallah. Okay, so that which breaks the fast then requires kafara. So we have to understand that starting the fast and then breaking it is considered very serious. And there was a situation where this happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where a Sahabi, he started the fast and then he broke the fast. He came to the Prophet ﷺ and he asked the Prophet ﷺ, what should I do? So the Prophet ﷺ commanded him to free a slave. He said, I'm a poor man, I cannot free a slave. The Prophet ﷺ commanded him to fast 60 days consecutively. He said, I cannot do that either, I'm weak. If I could fast 60 days, I would have fasted this one day. I broke one fast. So then the Prophet ﷺ told him to feed, 60 people. And it's a beautiful hadith. It's something that we can all benefit from. But this hadith basically shows us that a person who intentionally breaks the fast, he has to pay a kafara, right? He has to pay an expiation. Understand that the kafara is a penalty. It is a penalty for making a mistake. So a person who breaks the fast intentionally, he has to do the kafara. This is irrespective of the fact that he also has to make up his fast. So let's say a person, broke, a fast in Ramadan. Then that person has to do the penalty. The penalty is for the sin of breaking the fast. And then making up the fast is to fulfill the fard that is still due upon him. Just like you miss a salah, you have to perform the salah. This is why the kafara, 2 things. Number 1, it's not binding on someone who never starts the fast. Do you guys understand why? Because it's a penalty specifically for breaking the fast. So a person never intends to fast in the first place. Technically, of course, the sin is great and it has, its own, it is in its own place. It's not something which is recommended in any way. But that still doesn't mean that kafara is binding, because kafara is specifically a penalty for breaking a fast once you've started it. Secondly, the kafara is such that it is due upon the action. So that's why the scholars mention that if a person breaks multiple fasts in a Ramadan, then one kafara is binding on behalf of all those fasts. And then of course you have to make up the fast that you missed as well. So you'll make up multiple fasts, but you'll do one kafara because it's for that one penalty. And if a person does a kafara and then in the following year breaks another fast, he has to do a new kafara, right? Because it suffices for all of the mistakes you made in the past, not in the future. So this is the general overview of what kafara is. Now once we understand that it is a penalty, the scholars are very strict in that it should only apply in situations where a person is deserving of the penalty. So for instance, a person is, making wudu and he accidentally drinks water. Now that can't be equated to a situation where a person said, I'm fasting, but chocolate cake is chocolate cake, right? So in that second situation, that's more serious. That's deserving of a punishment. Whereas the first situation was just an accident. Therefore, kafara is only binding in a situation where it is very much, clear-cut, straightforward. A person just purposefully broke their fast. And this is why they mention that if a person breaks their fast with something that is, you don't usually eat, right? It's not something you usually consume. That is something which does not necessitate kafara. Right? We'll give you examples of that as well. Similarly, no extenuating circumstances. A person is sick and he has to take medication. Person is, like on the brink of, something and they have to take medication. Now, of course, that person just has to make up the fast. They don't have to do kafara for breaking the fast, etc., etc. So, here's some examples of things which will break the fast. So, what will not require kafara, what will break the fast but not require kafara is if you were to consume something which isn't food, right? We're going to see this in the next category. Right, so for instance, and the scholars mention, if you eat anything which is not meant to be eaten in that way. For instance, a person eats raw flour, right? When the flour is turned to bread, that's normal human food. But raw flour, not normal to just eat like that, right? Raw protein powder, just eating. So that type of thing, dirt, right? A person eats dirt, breaks his fast by eating dirt. That's not considered food. So therefore, that will not require kafara. But if a person eats, any normal human food, right? Drinks water. All of that will break the fast and require kafara. So eating or drinking purposefully, whether for nourishment or medical benefit. Medical benefit is an exception to medical necessity. A person is about to die or something along those lines. Of course, that is exempt from this. But a person just eating their vitamins because, I need to be stronger. So in any case, that would, of course, necessitate kafara. Intentionally swallowing the rainwater. This is just an example. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because water is something which you consume. You understand? Water is not something like dirt. Now, the way the person consumed it doesn't necessarily have to be normal. It doesn't have to be out of a water bottle. You could swallow the water that's falling from the sky. But because it's water that you consumed, that will break the fast, right? Similarly, eating something which is generally considered edible. I mentioned all of these examples. And that's obviously normal food. So again, we're talking specifically about eating and drinking here. Okay. So that was those things which break the fast and do require expiation. Now these are the things which break the fast, do not require expiation or kafara. Something which is not nourishing, right? Like, dirt or, whatever the case may be. So if a person breaks their fast on these types of things, of course, that does not require kafara. An extenuating circumstance. A person has an asthma attack and needs to take an inhaler. Something like that, of course, that would exempt the person from requiring kafara. Also due to a misunderstanding or misinformation. For instance, you think that iftar time has come in and you start eating. Later on you find out it actually was not iftar time. As long as you had eaten food on the assumption and on the information that iftari time had come in, you do not require kafara, you do not have to do kafara, but you will have to make up that fast because you ended the fast early. Similarly, eating after the fast time has already started, right? So suhoor time has ended, you're still eating, of course that will make the fast invalid, but you will not have to do kafara. So there's some examples here. Of course, there's a whole, mashallah, menu at the top. Raw rice, flour, fruit seeds, cotton, paper, pebbles, metal, earthly minerals, dirt. All those things, of course, would not require kafara. And you should probably figure out why you're doing that. Okay, so next. This is the slide I was talking about. Intentional, accidental, forgetful. Intentional, it breaks the fast and requires kafara. Intentional consumption of something which is nourishing. Breaks the fast, requires kafara. Forgetful, this is something which does not break the fast at all. An accidental is straight in the middle. That is something which will break the fast, but it will not require kafara because it was done accidentally. Okay, so the next category. So we talked about food and drink, and now let's talk about things of that relate to a sexual nature. So there are three categories again. This is very simple. First and foremost, that which doesn't break the fast. Anything which is unavoidable or forgetful, right? A person forgot they were fasting, right? Or a person, it happens unavoidably. For instance, having a wet dream, entering the state of janaba in the state of sleep, right? That is something that you cannot avoid. It's not in your control. It does not break the fast. Whereas if a person were to enter the state of janaba, right, then not from, it was not completely something which is out of the control of a person, like example of a wet dream. So a person enters the state of janaba. If that was with the actual action itself, then that will require kafara, because that is the highest level, right? That is something which will require kafara. And if it is in another method which is considered unnatural or considered unsanctioned, then because that is just like eating dirt and flour and raw rice and all that, that will break the fast, but that will not necessarily necessitate kafara. Okay, so now we're going to wrap this up inshallah with some common questions. First of all, injections and vaccines. I already explained this. I said because it does not enter into the stomach directly, it does not enter into this body cavity or the jawf as the scholars describe it, the fast will not be considered broken, right? So a person could technically get nourished with IVs, but that doesn't break the fast. It doesn't go against the fast. Eye drops and ear drops, I already explained this, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, go over this. As I said, you do have these slides. Say again? Yes. So, see, the previous books of fiqh, they used to mention that it does not, right? That it does not. And the reason they would say that is because it does not, they said that it does not have a pathway into the digestive system. However, that's something which modern scholars will rightfully contest, considering, it has it has ducts, right? There are ducts that lead from the eye into, and that's how, again, when you cry, then your nose fills up with tears. How does that happen? Because there's a duct that's going straight into the digestive system. So because of that, the modern scholars mention that eye drops will not be considered to be permissible in the fast. It will break the fast, right? And there is ikhtilaf there, so it depends on who you ask, of course, in that sense. Smoking. So smoking is something which does break the fast. Inhalation of a large amount of smoke, the scholars mention, which, they define this as you can feel it having a perceptible body within the digestive tract. And usually, smoking, of course, is something which falls under that category. It's something which does break the fast, but since it's not considered nourishing, it doesn't require kafara. So if a person breaks their fast from smoking, then it would break the fast, of course, but it does not require kafara. And as I said, secondhand smoke is not something which breaks the fast at all. I do want to mention, again, I'm missing a slide here. So another slide here or another important question I should mention here is smoke that comes from the kitchen, from food, right? So the scholars mention that the smoke that is around you, again, if it is such, they say that if it's such that you can feel a perceptible body coalescing within your mouth from the smoke, or within your nose from the smoke, going down your throat, that is something which would break the fast. Generally, as smelly as our foods are, it's not to that level, right? It's not that much smoke. However, still smelling the smoke intentionally would be considered makruh, right? It's considered, disliked, because it could lead a person, if a person is really ingesting smoke, ingesting steam, that will break the fast. Right, a person has, like a pot of steam and they're taking in steam. That will coalesce. There's water there. The water vapor is going to go into the stomach, right? Similarly, for instance, a humidifier. If a person's standing in front of a humidifier. If a person has a CPAP machine, right? There's two types of CPAP machines. Some which have humidifiers within them, some which don't. So a person is taking in the CPAP machine as a humidifier, that will be considered as breaking the fast. But as I said, the smell of food doesn't generally break the fast. However, it's still considered makruh to go and intentionally smell it. Of course, if you're working in the kitchen and you can smell it and it's all around you and it might even bite at your nose, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's enough to break the fast. Because it doesn't have that actual amount that is being ingested. But again, we should be generally careful from this and not intentionally inhale smoke. Now, this is something which I didn't mention. It should also be referenced here, right? Vomit or throwing up. So over here, if that throw up is exiting the body, right, that is something which does not break the fast. So naturally a person is throwing up, that's not something which breaks the fast, right? What does break the fast is a person intentionally makes themselves vomit and then swallows it back in, right? This is considered outside of your normal unavoidable situation, right? This is something which you forced on yourself and then you're ingesting it back in, and that will break the fast. Of course, again, in that situation, the kafara is not binding because it's not, like eating cake. Okay, next, food stuck in the mouth. This is our issue, right? Every time, because we have to eat food all the way until the bell rings, right? Until suhoor, absolutely finishes. So now, now we don't leave enough time to rinse our mouth, or even rinsing our mouth, there's some food stuck in the mouth. What's the ruling with regards to that? Scholars mention if it's a small amount of food. They say like if you were to put it all together, it wouldn't be more than like, a small, like a chickpea, about the amount of a chickpea in terms of circumference or size. So if that amount of food is stuck in the mouth and the fast has started, but the food was entered into the mouth before the fast began, meaning before suhoor time ended, then swallowing that will not break the fast. And this is again an expiation because it's impossible for us to properly always, completely clean the mouth. So if you have a little bit of food stuck in your mouth, you can swallow it. It won't break the fast. You don't need to keep continuously spitting. Similarly, a person who makes wudu, you will always have the taste of water in your mouth, right? This is something the scholars mention, that you do not have to remove that taste of water. If it's just the taste of water in your mouth, it is a small amount and it is forgiven, right? Because it is not a large amount that you are ingesting. So you don't have to continuously spit, right, to get everything out, because you will always have a little bit which mixed with the mouth, which mixed with the saliva, and they'll end up going down the throat. So that's all forgiven. Okay, so the rest is, we're talking about expiation. This is what the expiation is, and there's some exceptions. I just want to mention this slide and end here. These are certain things which are considered makruh. First of all, tasting food without any reason. Putting anything in your mouth without a reason. right, and spitting it out, right, chewing pencils or like whatever the case may be. This would all be considered makruh because it is obviously, it leads to the possibility of you breaking the fast. Similarly, anything which will lead to a person potentially breaking the fast. Right, so a person is weak and they're taking elective medical procedures like cupping, or they're doing other medical procedures where they feel like it might lead to them breaking the fast. And this is specifically in that situation. So if a person knows that I'm strong and I will not be affected by this, I do this all the time, the fast will not be broken by me after undergoing this procedure, then that is considered jaiz and permissible. But again, if it's completely elective and you know, or you have a fear that you might break the fast from it, this would be considered to be makruh. Similarly, gathering saliva in the mouth and swallowing it, right? This is something, it's considered makruh. It's something a person might do to sort of calm themselves down, but this is considered makruh. It should not be done, although it does not break the fast because it's all coming from within the mouth. And then here's some things which are not considered disliked: rubbing oil or lotion, even on the mustache where you can smell it, applying kuhul, I explained why, and doing miswak. There's another question that people have, which is, can you brush your teeth while you're in the state of fasting? So in light of the general principles which I mentioned, in light of the fact that the scholars mentioned putting things in your mouth and spitting it out does not break the fast, brushing your teeth technically will not break the fast, right? Although, as I said, putting something in your mouth and spitting it out is considered makruh without any reason. So therefore, brushing your teeth, especially if you're doing it with toothpaste, if you're doing it with toothpaste, you will spit it out as much as possible. You'll have a little bit that'll end up being ingested. So because of that, scholars mentioned this is considered makruh, right? But doing miswak is not considered a makruh. As a matter of fact, the Hanafi madhab says that doing miswak in a state of fasting is actually mustahab and is actually preferable. Right? This because it's a sunnah for the salah, it's a sunnah in general. So you use the miswak, of course, without any toothpaste or anything like that. So if a person is worried about having a certain thing stuck in their teeth, they can use the miswak. It won't eliminate the breath, the bad breath, because that comes not from the mouth, but more from it doesn't come from the teeth, but it comes more from the dry mouth and from the throat. So therefore, it's only used to clean out the teeth. Right? It's specifically used for that reason, and that's why it's not considered makruh. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because, the reason scholars, they differ with regards to whether miswak is okay or not is they say that there's a hadith of Prophet ﷺ which says that the smell of the breath of the fasting person is more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the smell of musk. And that's why the scholars mention that should a person use miswak or not. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah says he shouldn't, because this smell is so beloved to Allah, why would you want to remove it? And this is something just for us to appreciate. I understand that, going to work or in certain places, we might feel uncomfortable. That doesn't mean we should be using mouthwash or we should be brushing our teeth. The scholars mentioned that this is something which is considered beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why would you want to remove that, right? So if you have a problem with it, put on a mask, right? We have this option these days, alhamdulillah. But in any case, doing that unnecessarily would be considered makruh. So I'm going to end here inshallah, and again in the interest of time, I'm not going to field any questions. We do have one more session with Shaykh Kawthar. What we'll do is at the end, right Shaykh? At the end we'll take questions. Yes, so at the end inshallah I will take questions, and inshallah we will suffice on this. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.